So now I want to talk about something very interesting. Insulin resistance happens in the cells, but it can also happen, and it does happen, in your fat cells. Think about this. If you have insulin resistance in your fat cells, then what's going to happen, it's not going to let any more fat in there anymore, or glucose. It's not going to convert glucose into fat. It's not going to let any more fat in there because it's resisting it because it's filled up. So with insulin resistance, what the body is trying to do is get all the sugar out of the body and stick it into the fat cell. But there's a point where your fat cell gets, it's like a balloon. It gets only so much where it gets filled up. Then it spills over into the organs, into the liver, around the organs, as in the gut. It's called visceral fat. Fat around the organs. That's the spillover because your cells are saturated with fat. It's like that balloon is going to pop. It can't take any more fat. If you ever see those movies like Hoarders, where they, their house is just packed with stuff, same thing happening, but in your body. So this picture, like you have this garbage that you never take out. So you stick the garbage underneath the sink, and then you stick it into the cabinet, and then you stick it in the living room, and then the bedroom, and then over time your entire house becomes unlivable because there's no more spaces. This is exactly what's happening. When you see someone with a belly, they have insulin resistance to such an extreme that the liver is filled with fat. If they ever had an ultrasound, they would see that. Around the organs there's fat, and it's just sticking out through the gut. That is like one of the biggest indicators that you have some serious insulin resistance and your fat cells are to the extreme. So it's dangerous because now the fat's going to spill over in the organs, around the organs, and plug everything up. Okay? So you can see right here on the left side of the screen, normal fat cells, and then the large fat cells. And you will always see these large, overinflated fat cells with insulin resistance. Okay, the name for it is called hypertrophic adipocyte. Okay, you don't need to know that. But the point is that they just become so big. Okay? Now, at this point, someone is then going to lose control of the insulin resistance, and now it's at its max. Then the sugars are going to start to going up. Okay? Why? Because all the fat around the organ, in the arteries, in the liver, in the pancreas, it's going to block function, so things can't work anymore. So you're going to have a gradual shutdown of your organs. That's why a diabetic has a 22 times more likely increase of mortality rates. They're going to die 22 times more than a normal healthy person because of all these other complications that are occurring. But most people don't even see the high sugar yet. They get all these symptoms because of high insulin, and eventually they get the high sugar. So it's a wake-up call. And they're put on metformin, which actually improves insulin resistance without usually correcting the diet. So now what's going to happen is they're going to stabilize the blood sugar, but they never fix the real problem. So the problem goes on, and where do you think this sugar is going? It's sticking around the organ. So the person gets worse and worse and worse and worse to the point where the blood sugars aren't working anymore, even with glucophage or metformin. And so now they need insulin. So diabetic type 2 is now taking insulin and glucophage at the same time. God. It's terrible because the person already has too much insulin. So now we're going to actually add more complications. This is like completely and utterly insane because the person's going to get worse. They're going to start having vision issues because the actual cause is not corrected. And then you're going to eventually have some serious side effects and eventually die. And the doctor's going to say, well, these are the problems with the diabetic. That's what happens. We just try to extend the life. Well, you actually shorten the life by giving the person too much insulin. And then they give you a bag of candy so they can compensate because you don't want it to go down too low. Completely and utter insanity. Okay? All right, so now you know about that. Let's talk about what we can do about this. The most powerful thing you need to understand is what diabetes is and what insulin resistance is. It's basically too many carbs in the system. It's too much sugar in the body. The body is toxic of sugar and refined carbs. That's what the problem is. Okay? It has too much insulin, so the insulin is responding to the glucose from the diet and the carbs and the hidden sugars. So what we want to do is we want to cut out the carbs. Okay, we want to cut down the carbs. So we want to apply a diet that has a long-term health effect that can lower the carbs. So the one you want to do is called a healthy keto, healthy ketosis. Now the difference between a healthy keto diet and traditional keto is that the healthy ketosis is something that I am recommending as a tweak because it adds a lot more vegetables into this diet, whereby other types of ketosis programs do not. If you're dumping and reversing this problem and trying to extract all the fat from the fat cells and around the organs, it has to come out through the liver. If you don't have enough vegetables to compensate and help clear out this fat, you could end up with more of a fatty liver. So by going on a low-carb diet, that's going to instantly stop it from getting any worse, like that. Within a week, it's like going to be stopping from getting any worse. That's good. But then what we want to do is we want to reverse it and start cleaning out all the fat from the fat cells. That's when we do intermittent fasting. Why? Because intermittent fasting is not a diet, but a frequency of eating and not eating. Here's the data that you might not know. When you eat, you trigger insulin. So the more frequent eating, the worse it gets. The snacks in between meals, bad idea. So the body, regardless of what you eat, if you're eating, it'll spike insulin. So we want to lessen the frequency of eating because that is going to take the pressure and the stress off the system and start utilizing this overwhelming spilling off of fat that's going all over around the organs. So when you're doing intermittent fasting combined with healthy ketosis, you're basically using the most two powerful things you can do to extract all this fat out of the system and actually reverse insulin resistance to a point where your body can start to fuel itself and absorb nutrients. Then the nutrients will work. Before they didn't. Okay? So we've got to cut the carbs down. Now, protein, by the way, we don't want to do a high protein diet. And this is the confusion with ketosis. People think it's a high protein diet. No, it's not. It's moderate protein. It's between 3 to 6 grams of protein per meal. That's moderate. That's easy to do. If you have too much protein, you'll spike insulin. Yeah, so we don't want to do large quantities of protein. Now, the only food that does not trigger insulin to any significant degree would be fat, which is fascinating because we've been so fat phobic for years. Back in the 50s, there was two viewpoints. One is that fat caused coronary heart disease, and the other viewpoint was sugar caused coronary heart disease as a primary thing. But apparently the fat model, the fat connection, actually stuck. And all these years, we've been thoroughly indoctrinated and brainwashed to the point where people actually are still afraid of fat causing heart disease. But before the 50s, we didn't have that fear. Okay? Now, would you like to know where that came from? Would you like to know? I'm going to tell you. Recently, there was some leaked documents, 300 pages between 1957, I think, and 1971. And in these documents, it was a dialogue going back and forth between the Sugar Research Foundation and scientists. And I have a summary of this right here. Okay, and I'm just going to give you the gist of it. This is what happened. The Sugar Research Foundation, which is kind of a front group for the sugar industry, basically did research and found, they themselves did research and found a huge connection between consuming sucrose and causing heart disease. Okay, so they saw that. So that's not good, right, for sales. So what they did, they had a plan of action, a strategy. That was to two things. One was to omit the research data that sugar caused this problem or increased the risk. Suppress it, actually. Ignore it. Don't talk about it. Don't emphasize it. And then number two, emphasize the fat, cholesterol, heart disease connection big time. So they hired researchers and scientists. They hired a guy by the name of Frederick Ster, and he was the main leading expert in nutrition at Harvard University School of Health Department at the time. So Kellogg's and several other companies, including a tobacco company, sugar industry, paid him $1 million back in, I think, 1965. Okay? And by the way, over the next 29 years, he was also paid $29 million. Okay? Basically, he got bought off, and he basically did those two things. He de-emphasized the sugar connection and emphasized the fat connection. So that's really where this whole thing came from, the sugar industry. And they did the same thing in 1971 with the dental cavities, with the whole dentist industry, because they didn't want to cut the sugar out of the diets. Unfortunately, in 1965 I was born, and every single one of my teeth had a filled cavity. So I wish that data had not been suppressed, and I could have grew up without all this extra sugar. My parents didn't, they just let me eat pretty much whatever I wanted, being the Midwest. Because I didn't have any symptoms, I was a kid, right? I had blood sugar problems when I was 11 years old. So that's where it all came from, for your information. I also want to just mention one little thing about insulin. Insulin has been around for about 2 billion years on this planet. Certain mollusks, fish, single-cell organisms with a nucleus, even snails used insulin as a weapon. It's called the venomous cone snail, for example, would inject their prey with insulin to drop the blood sugars so they become stunned and kind of paralyzed and kind of tired, so then they can take over. So it's been a kind of a mechanism in the animal kingdom for quite a while. And then even in 1927, the psychiatrist used something called insulin shock therapy to so-called cure people. And they would have large doses of injections with insulin to drop the blood sugars, to put people in comas for several weeks. Some people would have 50 to 60 comas before the maximum benefits were achieved. They said this therapy jolted them out of their mental illness. And I'm not kidding. Is this barbaric? The problem is it has a risk of death and brain damage from prolonged coma. They would actually wake up fat. Crazy. So at the time, they said the brain damage was actually therapeutic improvements because it showed a loss of tension and nervousness and things like that. Completely insane. And then, of course, shortly after that, they replaced it with electric shock therapy. And that's medicine at its best. Completely insane. And now they're using drug therapy, which, by the way, has massive side effects and suicide. So anyway, the number one disease that kills most people is heart disease. Number two is cancer. And by the way, guess what cancer lives on? Sugar. So again, if you want to feed cancer, just keep eating sugar. And then number three is, the third cause of death is medical errors, called iatrogenic disease, physician-caused illness. Okay, that's number three. And then we have the lower respiratory diseases, and then accidents, and then strokes, and then Alzheimer's and diabetes, influenza. So you could see that several of these common causes of death actually are originating from high levels of insulin, especially the first two. All right, so now, how do we solve this problem? What we want to do is we want to implement keto and intermittent fasting. Keto, what makes keto, and by the way, keto is involved in a condition of fat burning where your body's breaking fat down into ketones to be used as an alternative fuel. Okay? Ketones are much cleaner than glucose. So, but we want to go from sugar burning to fat burning. That's the goal. And in the process of adapting, we basically need to build up new cell machinery to actually run on fat and glucose. So your body can do that. The only way to do that is to drop your carbs way down. And then the body has no choice but to start utilizing fat. So it adapts. It takes like 3 days to sometimes up to 3, 4, 5 weeks to fully adapt into ketosis. Now, in the process, your body needs more potassium and it needs more B vitamins. So we always recommend nutritional yeast and a lot of salads. Okay, those two right there will help you make the transition very smoothly. Now, I want to briefly talk about insulin triggers. Sugar, refined grains, okay, like breads and pastas and things like that. Frequent eating, excessive amounts of protein. When you combine protein with carbs, that will do it too. Fat with carbs will do it too, like a donut, deep fried carbohydrate. Vitamin D deficiency, potassium deficiency, soy oil, it's GMO. That can trigger it as well. Artificial sweeteners, trans fats, cortisol, that's stress. All those will trigger high levels of insulin. How to lower insulin? Very simply, lower the carbs, do intermittent fasting, add potassium from the diet and magnesium from the vegetables, omega-3 fats, which we're going to recommend, vitamin D from the sun, magnesium from the vegetables, and you can also add trace minerals, chromium and zinc, and even apple cider vinegar if you want, which will really help. You put it in some water, put some lemon in there, sip it with a straw. That will greatly help your blood sugars. Now, the type of ketogenic diet that I'm going to recommend would be, if we look at calories, 5% of the total calories, carbs, net carbs. So you would take the total carb minus the fiber to get the net carb. Okay, the next thing I'm going to recommend is 5% in calories of vegetables. Now, if we're doing 7 to 10 cups of vegetable per day, why is it only 5%? We're talking about calories. Vegetables do not have a lot of calories. Okay, they have a lot of volume, but not a lot of calories. But we need the salads, we need the large quantities of vegetables to do this right. Very important. And you'll feel so much better when you do it. Okay, then the 20% protein, which comes out to 3 to 6 ounces per meal. Of course, when we do intermittent fasting, that's a whole different story because we can reduce the amounts as we go through this, but there's no way you're going to do one meal at 2,000 calories. That's a huge meal. So maybe you do 1,200 calories. And as your body does intermittent fasting, it does not need the quantities of nutrients because your body conserves things. It becomes very, it kind of protects the loss of nutrients and proteins. Interesting. So after the 20% protein, you're going to do the rest fat. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a second. So if you were to get your 4,700 milligram dosage or requirement of potassium every day, you would have to consume like 10 bananas or 5 avocados every day. Well, we don't want to do bananas because it's too sweet. So we want the large vegetables. We want the large salad. Okay, so, but it's not hard. If you do, let's say for example, you do 3 meals and in each meal is a small salad of 3 or 4 cups. You can easily hit your 10 cups a day. But when you do intermittent fasting and you're doing like 2 meals or 1 meal, then you need a little less, maybe it's 7 cups, but it's not hard to do this. So one of those bags of lettuce that you get at the grocery store, it's usually about 7 or 8 ounces. 1 ounce equals 1 cup, okay? So you can think with that. Just look at the ounces and that will tell you how many cups. Like one of those plastic containers of salad, I like to get organic, like they come in 8 ounce or sometimes they come in 20 ounce. So just realize that if it's 8 ounces, that's 8 cups. So the big problem that people have, even if they're eating healthy, is that they're eating too frequently. They're doing 3 meals plus snacks at night. I'm guilty. In fact, in my first book, this is what I recommended, which was very, very not good because it kept me from getting 100% results and other people too, especially if they had a slow metabolism. So we don't want to do that. We want to start off with 3 meals, no snacks at all. How do you do that? Well, at the meal, you start with your salad first, then your protein, and then you want to add fat. Enough fat so you can go from one meal to the next without being uncomfortable. So that's something you're going to have to adjust. You can add brie cheese, you can add peanut butter, an avocado, coconut oil, a little more butter. You can add all these things, cream cheese, anything like that, and then that's going to actually allow you to go from one meal to the next. And then that big salad with all the potassium will also definitely help you too. So it'll be easy to do that if you make these changes. But you always need to do healthy ketosis with intermittent fasting together. They don't work individually. Because if you're still eating carbs, a lot of carbs, and you're doing intermittent fasting, you'll never get into ketosis. So you're going to basically start stretching out the times you don't eat and literally make it hell for yourself. Because if you, with blood sugars and trying to go intermittent fasting when you're starving, it's going to really create a brain strain. It's only when you convert over to fat burning where your brain is happy and it's like you don't get hungry and you feel focused and have endurance all day long. It's the best thing for the brain. But not if you're eating carbs. So 3 meals, and then what happens is the rule is that you don't eat if you're not hungry. Okay, don't eat if you're not hungry. In the morning, if you're not hungry, don't eat. But what we want to do after you get comfortable with 3 meals, no snacks, is start pushing your breakfast further and further towards lunch to the point where you make it's gone. So you don't eat in the morning, you just have your first meal at lunch. Now, you might think you're starving yourself, but now your body, when you start doing intermittent fasting, it does something really weird and interesting. The stress of that caused your body to survive at a certain level where it starts to recycle old, damaged protein structure parts of the cell and microbes, bacteria, virus, yeast, fungus, mold, and candida. It cleans that out of the cell, it restructures everything, it recycles, it becomes a self-cleaning oven. It's the ultimate in anti-aging. Also, when you intermittent fast, you basically spike human growth hormone by 1,300% in women and up to 2,000% in men. That's incredible. You don't need to buy the injections. You can just basically do this and start getting younger. I'm, in about 2 weeks from now, I'll be 53 years old. Okay, there's a lot of, I looked at my high school reunion, that I think it's actually the 30th coming up, or it just passed. I was looking at some of these people, I'm like, oh my God, they could be my grandparents. So I would never say that to them, but the point is that people in their 50s they look old. It's crazy. So we want to do 3 meals, no snacks, 2 meals, and if you want to take it to the next level, this is up to you. Play it by ear. If you have a stubborn metabolism, if you have a thyroid issue, if you're a diabetic, and you have a lot of fat to lose, eventually go to 1 meal a day. You can totally do it with a lot of success, because I know a lot of my clients do 1 meal a day and they're so healthy and they're losing weight and they feel euphoric because they're doing fine, and as soon as they ate, all of a sudden now they're hungry an hour later because they spiked the blood sugars. So there's a way to undo that. So here I have just an example so you can see if you're doing 3 meals a day. Let's average, let's say 1,800 calories. This is kind of an example of what you could eat with the proteins, fats, vegetables. So you can see each meal looks like this right here. And you can even pause this and kind of look at this a little longer, but you can see there's avocados for the fat, there's protein, there's eggs, there's salad, and then there's a burger with cheese, and then there's some other foods. Looks like there's some pork right here with this other dish. All right, so that's 3 meals, and then we have 2 meals a day, where now we're going to actually, instead of keeping it at 1,800 calories, maybe we go down to 1,500 calories, okay? We split it up, have 2 bigger meals, and that's kind of what it would look like. Okay, and then down to 1 meal, 1,200 calories. It's more quantity. You can see the amount of protein, fat, and vegetable. That's what you would eat, just to give you an example. Some people might discourage you, especially the sugar industry, which is going to continue to put out that keto is the worst thing you can do. Don't do intermittent fasting and hurt your thyroid. It's rated the worst diet. Do the DASH diet. Really? So in other words, consume 60% of your diet carbohydrates. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, the American Society on Obesity all recommend large quantities of carbohydrate and healthy grains. It's all political. They get funding from the food manufacturing and the drug companies. So for you to trust them, I mean, that's illogical, because how can you trust someone that they're basically a front group, get paid by that industry, and so do the dietitians. So here's what I recommend you do. You do the keto, intermittent fasting. See if it works for you, which I already know it will. See how good you feel. Lose the weight. And then do the DASH diet. Do some of the diets that are recommended by the American Heart Association and see how you feel. And then you decide what works for you. Keto is very healthy, because when you do keto, there could be some transitional issues that you just have to understand and go through. And this is why you don't want to do this halfway. You want to do it all flat out. If you're going to do it 100%. So that means learn about it. I recommend study how to do it before you do it, so that way you do it correctly. Because I can't tell you how many people like, oh, I tried it and I'm getting a side effect. Well, that's because you didn't know you had to drink lemon juice, when you do this, or take B vitamins or nutritional yeast. Because you can have, in the transition period, you can have keto fatigue, which is really a B vitamin deficiency or potassium. You can have a little a gout flare-up. It's only temporary. That could happen if you don't have lemon juice. Keto flu, which you just need more electrolytes. Bad breath, that means your protein's too high. Hair loss, it means that your calories are too low. I mean, constipation, you're not consuming enough vegetables. Bloating, you're having too much fat. So there's all these little things that you can tweak and do it correct, because this is about your health. This is your real long-term health insurance. My health insurance is crazy. It's like $3,100 a month, and there's a huge deductible. What do I get for that? There's not, just the catastrophe if something happened, but the point is that you have to take health in your own hands. The doctors are not trained by it. The whole system is designed for managing your symptoms, not building up your health. Okay, so I just want to personally thank you for spending the time making it this far. I appreciate your attention. I hope your awareness now is to the point where you see where the problem is and what you need to focus on and what you need to do. I wish you the best of success, and I cannot wait to read your personal success story. Thank you.